Occasionally, as a reader, you will come across a book in which you will accept no criticism. It just wowed you, it came at the right time for whatever reason, and this is one of those books for me. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video is going to be an absolute gush fest for The City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. I will be getting a physical copy of this one, I just don't have it yet. This was one of those books that completely swept me off my feet. Now, I don't know whether it was because I was having quite a busy month with my own release, but this book I was so enamored with it from start to finish. I don't want to hear anyone say that they don't like it in any way, shape, or form. And I do have to thank Joshana for continually talking about this book and making me curious enough to pick it up because it was just fantastic. This is going to be a gush fest. I can't even tell you this is going to be a review. It is not objective. I just had such a fabulous time with this one. I will touch very briefly on a couple of things that towards the end, but for the most part, this is just me telling you how much I enjoyed this one. City of Girls follows the story of our now 90-ish-year-old Vivian Morris, who has lived one hell of a life. It opens up with a request from the daughter of an old friend of Mrs. Morris by asking her who she was to her now late father. Vivian then responds with something along the lines of, "To know who I was to your father, you need to know who I was and who I am now." Cue us being transported way back to the 1940s, where a now 19-year-old Vivian Morris has been kicked out of college and is sent to live with Aunt Peg in Manhattan, where she picks up a fabulously colourful life at the Lily Playhouse. Upon entering the Playhouse, our main character is wooed by theatre life. From the glamorous showgirls to the intricacies of putting on mediocre plays for a few neighbourhood loyals, it was certainly a very fun time for me as the reader. As Vivian becomes more comfortable and she starts to find her place among the theatre, she becomes a costume designer. She is whisked into a world of sex, booze, and more frivolity than you could poke a stick at, and that really does come down to Miss Cecilia Ray. We watch as she falls in and out of love, is drawn into mass productions, works through the war in less than desirable circumstances, and settles into her middle age. Now, as a 90-something-year-old, she narrates her life with a critical lens while letting the reader know that she does not regret a thing. I think this is the fastest I've ever consumed an audiobook. I did do this one on audio. I could not put it down. I could not stop thinking about it. As soon as I had to walk into the workplace, I was chucking my headphones in and hitting play again. And I would reread this again and again and again. And I am not a rereader, so this one has so much value for me personally. Now, I adored this book. I loved the glitz, I loved the glamour, I loved the unapologetic sexuality of Vivian's life. It drew me in like patrons to one of Uncle Billy's plays. I was hooked from page 1 to page 470, or wherever it ended around that mark. Now, some of the criticism for this book is that it went on for too long. No way. I could have done at least another 100 pages following Vivian and her dramatic lifestyle. For me, the magic of this book really come down to three main things. The first is Vivian's narrative voice. She is truly fantastic, and I'll break down each of these parts as we go through my gush fest. The second is the underlying emotional beats, which were there, but were never overshadowing this over-the-top drama, and then the characters as the third thing. No matter how big or small their parts, Gilbert was able to bring them to life and make them mean something on the page. So jumping into what I loved, and I could probably gush about this book for way too long, but we'll stick to the few things that I have penned here. The first is Vivian's narration of her life. She doesn't shy away from anything, the good, the bad, the ugly. She invites the reader into her passions in every sense of the word. We see her utterly enamored with the theatre and the people inside of it. We see her fascinated in a world that never seems to sleep, being 1940s New York. We see her desperately seek the notice of people around her, whom she deems even more beautiful and talented than herself, or the people that she thinks that she can learn from, or grow with, or grow from, and sometimes even come to be better than them. At the same time, there's always this sense that she is now an older woman. She is now looking back on her life. She's looking back on this life lived with fondness, laughing at some of the silly choices that she made as a young woman, and still holding space for some of those deeper moments that affect all of us as we go through life. These particular moments invited a much more emotional response from the reader, and they were not skipped over in any way, shape, or form. As someone in their 90s who has lived through some very harsh times, we do see the effects of World War II somewhat without going too deep into the devastation of it. The author doesn't shy away from the effects of these things, even if the book is designed to be relatively light-hearted. We get to share in Vivian's loss, in her discomfort, in her abuse in some cases, and how she heals from these things without giving in to despair. Vivian comes across as a survivor through and through, and I was so there every time she picked herself up. Now, I do also want to touch on characters outside of Vivian because they all did feel quite distinct to me. They all had their own voice. Even though we are following Morris as the narrator of her life, and the story is very much focused on her, she also has interactions with several key people who help shape the version that we see at the end of the book, who is not necessarily different, but definitely more grown up and adult as the 19-year-old we are introduced to. Aunt Peg and Olive were precious to me. It was quite an interesting experience for me reading someone like Olive because she was probably the closest that I would ever see myself inside of this type of tale. Olive was sort of presented as a bit of a hard ass, but you could see the softness in the way that she cared inside the pages, and I don't think that's necessarily an easy thing to do for an author. Olive was a stickler for the rules. She loved a good budget. She seemingly keeps Aunt Peg grounded, sometimes coming across as a little bit controlling, but she had a heart of gold. And you could see that in her actions, very acts of service, would be a practical kind of softness. We got little snippets of this practical softness in the way that she showed her love and affection for the people around her. Now, most often that was Aunt Peg, but also to Vivian herself. And I thought, like, it will never not be something that affected me in a read. And in a read of this nature where I got to have that experience just was something special in itself. And then we have someone like Uncle Billy, who is brilliantly dazzling and can do no wrong, even though he is a horrific womanizer. Somehow you couldn't help but love him and just fall into his nonsense and his presence on the page. He felt larger than life in the few chapters that we got him. We also had people like Cecilia Ray, who was a glamorous showgirl who drags Vivian out every night and lulls her into this lavish lifestyle that maybe wasn't the healthiest. We have the great theatre actress Edna Parker Watson, who stars in the titular play, The City of Girls. All of these characters were fantastic, and there were many more where that came from. Two characters that only had a few lines in the book where we get to see little snippets of them. They felt like real people in this vivid world that we are in. Now, I will touch very briefly on some of the problematic themes that are inside this. This isn't a critique by any means. Like I said, I loved it, but there is some homophobia and misogyny in this book which comes to mind. They didn't take away from the enjoyment of the story, in my opinion, at all. They're just there. So maybe just know that before going in. I would argue personally that these were presented as products of the time of the book that we're in. So in the period in which the book is set, it makes sense for these conversations to be taking place. However, you could also argue that is there really a place for these things in modern literature? Wherever you fall, I will say the problematic content was very light in comparison to some of other things that I have read. I was so surprised at how much I loved this book. I had no idea what to expect going into a contemporary, romanticized historical fiction. I did not know if I would enjoy that sort of thing. It was so far out of my usual wheelhouse, but it certainly has me thinking, hang on a minute. If I love this book so much, what else is there to discover? So those are my thoughts on City of Girls. Obviously, I'm biased. I had a fantastic time with this one. Let me know if you've read it. Let me know if you'll pick it up. Let me know. Let me know if there are other books that I should be reading in a similar vein. So if you have recommendations, I am all ears. If you like the content, give one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will, and I will catch you in the next video. Ciao.